Welcome to Shrimpy's Paint Booth. On today's episode, we have the United States Mark II hand grenade. This model was made by username Leon over on myminifactory. If you'd like to print one for yourself and follow along, I will leave a link in the description below. While this is printing, let's talk about the history of the grenade itself. In 1918, the United States decided to retire the Mark I as it had a fatal flaw where it required either a special throwing technique or an extra step of twisting the lever to get it to arm. Whereas in the Mark II, you pull the pin, the lever spring activated, so you just throw it, it flies off and activates. Now on this model that I have here, I'm not doing the pin just because I'm a little afraid of scratching the paint. I've had too many issues with that before, so trying to hold off. And I guess while I'm here, let me also state my situation's a little bit unique. I'm in a basement, I got people above me, so I'm going to try and avoid using spray paints, enamels, lacquers as much as I can. Most of anything I'm going to spray is water-based acrylics. With all that said, let's start filling in some layer lines. Today I'm going to be using some Vallejo Mecha matte varnish and occasionally some polyacrylic, but we don't want to talk about that. And then I'm going to add some titanium dioxide to give it some particle grit that'll help, at least hopefully, fill in some layer lines. Pessimism aside, I've done some similar stuff with just varnish to fill it in. It just takes a lot longer, so that's really why I'm like, maybe. For those following along, I'm not really keeping track of what ratios or how much of anything I'm using, so it tends to be just a decent squirt of the varnish and then about a small popsicle stick scoop worth of titanium dioxide. And really one of the big things is we do need to mix it well, and then as long as we didn't add too much of the titanium dioxide, it should spray just as fine. While we are spraying, it's kind of different from your normal techniques of spraying light, even coats. We want to go well beyond a glass coat. We want to flood the surface. So get it as close to running as you possibly can. We can get away from some of this almost excessive amount of paint just because the matte varnish and then the titanium dioxide both kind of affect surface tension and help it to lock in place. It still might drip if you go a little bit too far, or at least bulge, but you can always sand that later. I'm planning about 4 or 5 coats of varnish, no real sanding until maybe the very end. Now I'm going to speed through some of the other layers. There's no point in showing everything as it's basically the same. I will point out a couple things, like if you add too much titanium dioxide, it becomes a pain to spray. Like you can see on screen here, I'm pulling back and forth on the trigger, it's sputtering. You can get it to work sometimes if you add more varnish, but it's a little bit of a toss-up. Sometimes it's better to just start with a new pot rather than force it to work. Now, one good thing that can come about from adding a little bit too much titanium dioxide is that we can get a little bit more texture out of it. The grenade body is a cast hull, so we do want some nice pitting, some texture to it. And that's definitely where, even though I kind of added too much, I do get some of that benefit from it. But other than that, the basic game plan is spray a whole lot of paint, let it dry enough that we can either A, add some more layers, or if I need to do any small touch-up sanding, and keep going until I'm very happy with it. So I'm going to spray some primer. This is the Createx Autoborn Sealer in gray. Absolutely fantastic primer. And I'm going to take this, just smooth out all the layer lines, get rid of some of these funky colors that I've been doing, just so we can then get to the inspection stage. So if we take a look here, we can see the layer lines are pretty much all gone. There might be a little bit more. I know I went back later and added another coat, but it's pretty smooth. The top section where it's really stepped, that's mostly gone. I kind of wish it did more, but it is what it is. Of course, the handle and fuse sections were also done in the same way. There was a little bit of a hiccup with the handle. I had started originally with a different paint. I was using some Vallejo Mecha primer, and that stuff, man, Didn't stick, it ended up peeling off like it was a skin, kind of nasty, so I had to start over from scratch. Now let's talk paint. For this project, I'm going to be using a color I made about a year ago for an M22. If I had written things down, I'd be able to tell you, hey, this is about how much of this color and this color, but smart me, I said, nah, I don't need to do that. So good luck. I will be able to tell you I did mix a lot more of the main color than normal and then added some of the concrete lighter pale color in the background to create some color modulation. I won't use some of the lighter colors. I will do one of the lightest ones and add a little bit of a highlight by spraying from the top down and then just doing some random cloudy patterns on some of the faces. Really subtle. I'm used to 1/35th scale, so this is where I'm kind of like, I need to try some stuff. That's basically it for the color on the main body. I will be doing the yellowish orange stripe on the top, as well as some chipping and some weathering. Not too much though, I kind of want to keep this relatively newish. Moving back to the handle and fuse, that's going to be painted in a neutral gray. This is by Ammo. It should give us a really good base for adding some other metal looking chips and weathering. Which means we can start on the chipping and weathering process. So what we are going to do is take some Vallejo Gunmetal Gray, which is a metallic paint, and brush the edges to give them just a little bit of a polished edge. You can also use graphite as a substitute. It'll be a little bit darker and a little bit less pronounced. I'm only going to do a couple edges here and there, be a little strategic. It can kind of get a little bit over the top if you go too hard, so don't do that. So let me finish up with this guy and then the handle, and then I can come back and kind of let you inspect what I've done. So here's what the fuse will look afterwards. Again, it's not a major like, oh wow, it's everywhere. It's just here and there, subtle. Handle's done the same way, just a little bit of here and there. Again, we're not going for something crazy, fantastic, just a little bit of, oh, okay, there's something there. Switching over to some enamel paints, which, yes, I know, I said I wouldn't do enamels, but this isn't being sprayed, so I find it's a little bit easier. As long as I'm careful about it, it's not that big a deal for me. Starting out, we will use some black wash. This is really good for emphasizing some shadows and building up some debris or grit in corners. So yeah, let's work it into them corners. Oil-based paints tend to be better for me in this area as it's easier to go back and dilute them and kind of blend them into the surrounding areas. Whereas acrylic, once it's dry, it's much harder to remove or dilute. So yeah, that's the fuse with its dark wash. The handle is going to be just about the same, so I won't show it. Instead, I'll show it when we do the next step, which is rust effects. So here I will be using a light and dark rust. Because we're on a metal surface, there's no set defined, hey, this is where the rust should go. So what we'll do is do some randomized dot patterns, just add a little bit of that rust tint. And since I, in my infinite wisdom, didn't actually record any close-ups of this, we're going to skip to the next step, which is adding some other metal-looking chips to it. Using a light gray and a medium gunship gray, we can add some dots and then some dashes to really just show that, hey, it's been handled. And then we can use both colors to kind of just add a little bit of extra variation and create some of that texture that we're looking for. And it'll turn out a little something like this. Just some nice metal looking pieces with a lot of texture. Now back to the main body section. You might have snuck a peek here and there as I kind of did this out of order, but let's talk about it. So using a dabber, we're going to apply some paint, remove the excess, and then that should give us a bunch of small, very tiny dots. And what we'll do is apply them in strategic areas to get some nice chipping effects. I've used this mostly with 1/35th scale, so it's probably not the best at a 1:1 scale. I'm going to go with it for now until I kind of find out a different method. But it should look something like this. Afterwards, we can go back with a smaller brush and just add a little bit more or emphasize areas that we weren't able to get with the dabber. Before we put away the acrylics, let's also add the yellow ring to the top of the grenade. This is to signify that it is filled with high explosives. I didn't have this exact color, so I'm going to use a mix of old wood, wood, and medium yellow to create the right hue that I'm looking for. And then afterwards, I'm just going to slap it along the top. It's not something that was done, with the most meticulous care. It was something to get it out into the field. And then, grabbing that dark wash from before, we can go back and emphasize some of the pineapple bits. These grooves were supposed to enhance the fragmentation abilities of the grenade, but it didn't do as much as they had hoped. It does, however, make a really nice, interesting looking model. And then to finish off the model, let's go over some of the gray chipping effects with some rust and just add a little bit more texture and variation to it. So now the last step is to glue the fuse to the body, stick it on a stand, add some lights, maybe play around with them while I'm doing it, and show off. And hopefully you've learned something. I know I have. I've had to re-record the audio at least 3 times so far, as well as play around with my camera and whatnot. If you liked what you've seen, feel free to like the video, and as well as if you want to see more content, please subscribe. Now if you'll excuse me, I gotta go feed my shrimp.